Hey everybody, I'm Yvonne Williams with Back to Earth Creations, and in this video I want to demonstrate to y'all some of my favorite ways of using backgrounding tools when working with leather. Now here you can see, and I've actually done a tutorial on this before, how I use a backgrounding tool to give a nice kind of border effect, but in today's video I'm going to show you how to actually fill in large spaces and some techniques that we can practice. Now there are a couple of backgrounding tools that I use most frequently, and that would be these two. There'll be links to all the different tools and materials down in the video description below, but there are some other ones available on the market that have different textures. So you can see this one has a neat, like, pokey texture. These two are actually the same texture, but different sizes, and that way you can kind of get in between, like if you're doing figure carving or knotwork or anything like that. It lets you get into all the small spaces. It does help to have a very large and a very small, if you've got the budget for it, a medium as well, in the different sizes, because that way you can, you can kind of fit in tight spots with a larger tool, but you do not want to have to fill in a huge expanse with a tiny tool. It's going to drive you bonkers. So here I have some 4-ounce leather that's been well cased. I held it under the water till the bubbles stopped, and then I have let it kind of come back to, it's not quite its original color. It's still dark with being damp, but there's no water pooling, and if I were to put some moisture onto it, it would soak in pretty readily, like kind of gradually, but I can demonstrate. Let's do that. I'm actually just going to use this water bottle here. You can see the water goes onto the surface of the leather, and it's moist enough that it's not like slurping it up, but it still can fit a little bit more water into it. You're going to get a muddy effect if you have soggy leather. So you want it to be a little thirsty. Now, I like this backgrounding tool because it gives it a very like pebbly effect. So I'm going to come through, and I apologize for the loud hammering, but if you're new to this, you can do where you just place and hit and then place and hit. You can see that effect that it gives, a really nice pebbling. Now with some tools, sometimes, and this is something I did for a long time and I'm glad that I stopped, but I would just walk it. I would, where you kind of hit it and let it move itself along just by jumping, and you can see the difference in how those patterns came out. And so I very much prefer, at least with this tool, a nice kind of hopping place and hit. And whenever I'm filling in a background, I'll kind of just work in lines. You can turn the tool one way or another to give it a little bit of variation. And that way you're not getting the same hit in the same spot, but you'll want to watch out for getting, see how it kind of, you can see where the rows were, it's almost like a plowed field. You can see where the plow furrows went up and down. So I'm going to come in there in between. And be pretty random with it. Because however you end up doing this, just be consistent with it, because your consistency is what's going to shine through the whole filled in area of the piece. So I'm going to do one more row. And this one I actually added in a little zigzaggy. In that way we don't have as much of that furrowing problem. But just keep in mind though, if you hammer too much too close together, you're going to get a less defined design than if you go through and do it independently. So that was this tool, which it says on the handle it is M884 if you have a Tandy Leather catalog on hand. So just, I don't know, reference, I guess. Now the next one This one's probably my favorite. It's going to give us this effect if we use it with an antique gel. And again, with this one, I place and hit, place and hit. And that gives us a really nice, let me do a row for you. And you can see, I like to just like kind of change the angle a little bit, because if you go through most people have a pretty good eye for pattern recognition, even if it's just on a subconscious level. And if it's blocky and repetitive, they're going to notice that. Whereas if it has a nice organic gradual effect to it, I don't know, it's a lot less like, you know, the customer or the client or the person appreciating your art isn't going to zoom in on, hey, they just hit the same tool over and over again. They're going to be like, whoa, how'd they do that? So, or at least that's my experience with it, working this past decade with selling my costumes and artwork and such. So again, on this one though, if you do find yourself getting a little repetitive, that's all right. You can come in and I'm going to fill in the gap in between these two rows. And you can see that really worked out nicely, kind of blending them in together. Now my favorite way to use this tool, actually, because this one can be a little bit difficult, and I'll show you, let me demonstrate a few more and then I'll show you what I was thinking of. Let's use this one. That one's a fun one. And this one I really like because it takes a nice deep antique gel and it'll give you a really nice contrast if you had to do like Celtic knotwork or, you know, any kind of ornate carving that you really want to just pop. So again, with this one we can kind of come through. Now with these ones, I do like to give it a little bit of overlap in between. And this pulls off a lot better hitting and blending than just sitting it side by side. So let me fill in kind of a spot here. I really hope this camera angle is working out all right. I can't have the camera too close or I whack it with my hammer. And you can change, you can see there, I just got a nice little curve just by filling in that way. And don't hesitate at all to experiment and kind of see what works for you. Now here you can see, you can definitely see a little bit where my different lines and stuff were. And the idea is to be able to have that blended out so evenly that you can't see the tool marks. At least that's what I usually go for. So now I'm going to come back through a little bit more lightly perhaps in the first layer. And just add in a little bit more texturing. And maybe don't follow the same pattern of tooling. You know, if you went vertically in rows, then maybe come back and do it like on a diagonal, just to break up that pattern just a little bit. And also, this is just the way that I've developed to do over the years. I've never had the benefit of studying underneath someone else in their tooling techniques. So if you have a favorite way of using any of these tools or any ideas or anything, please leave those down below. I would love to learn from you. And so I'm going to keep coming through. And you can also do some pretty nice fades with this. Kind of fading off from denser into lighter, which is a great way if you had like a central design and you wanted to fade off into untooled leather. That would be a great way of doing it, and you could do that with any of these. Just don't hit it as hard. Easier said than done, but you'll get the hang of it. And so that, I'm not as good with that tool as I would like to be. It takes a lot more practice, and I would recommend going in lightly because you can always build into a deeper tool, but you can't really, or rather it's much more difficult to lighten up your tooling. And even with doing it very lightly like that, that'll still take quite a bit of antique gel whenever I'm going through later. Now, something that I have done is if I tool beyond where I would like to have, I'll sometimes go through with just a flat back end of my tool and try to burnish it out a little bit. Now keep in mind, this is you're burnishing the pores of your leather, so while it can buff out some of that tooling, that spot's now not going to take the dye as readily as the spaces around it. So sometimes I'll just leave that extra little bit of tooling there and hope that nobody notices, as opposed to trying to erase it and it almost becomes a big, nasty eraser mark on an otherwise clean paper, if that makes sense. And so, and then we've got this one, which you can also, these are just a couple of tools. I didn't want to overwhelm you guys, but I've seen folks go through with Pear shaders, and kind of fill in a background. Just kind of changing the direction of the shader and filling in a whole background like that. Sorry, I lost a bit of footage there. You can see I went through with, I'm going to try to repeat what I had demonstrated and then lost the footage of. We used our curved, like rounded pear shader, which you can see this one, even though they're both kind of that pear shape, they're both that nice pear shape. And this one, you can see I've taught too many classes with it where folks used it directly on the granite and my texture has started to come out, but it still works all right. You can see this one is nice and flat, whereas that one is a bit rounded. And so it would give us a much sharper edge. And so doing that same technique as what we had done before gets us a very different effect because of the difference in tools. But you could go through, and this one having a finer tooth to it than the rectangular tool gives a really nice kind of shaded background. And again, if you do big steps in between hitting it, you're going to get more footprints than if you kind of blend them all in together with each other. And on something like this one where it has such a fine meshed tooth, you don't really have to worry about it getting muddied up the way that you would with ones with a more distinct pattern. Okay, and so I had also, before I lost some footage, had demonstrated cutting with the swivel knife, just cutting in a border. And so I'm actually going to do a double cut on these ones because I wanted to demonstrate the difference that you would get between using a smooth beveled foot and a textured bevel foot. Whenever you use the smooth beveler, what it's doing is it's actually smoothing off all of that leather that you might have otherwise had some texture on. So I'm just going to place this, and I place the deeper end of the foot right up against our cut that we made with our swivel knife, and then I'm just going to tap and walk it along with my hammer. And again, you're going to get a much smoother line if you overlap each of your hits quite a bit. You want to just, progress is made in millimeters, so you're just going to inchworm along just very smooth on your bevels. And so you can see it smooths the design that was there underneath it. Whereas if we come in with a texture foot, it's still achieving that same bevel, but it's giving us a little bit of tooth and texture, which while that doesn't necessarily match perfectly to this kind of pebbly lizard skin background, on something like this one here, you can see where there's actually a gap between our design and our border, we can come in and fill that in with our beveler. See how that worked? And I ride it pretty high up on the tip of my beveler foot. You can actually lean it farther back and almost double the amount of space that you're covering with that nice texture pattern. Now also too, you always have the option of doing your cut and your bevel if you want a nice darker border, or you could just bevel or tool right up against that line. See how that kind of worked? Gave us two very different effects, but you still got that nice change in level. And then you can also cut, bevel, and then come through and add in your background texture. Which that's probably one of my favorite ways of doing it, because that way you still get the depth change of the beveler foot, but you also get your preferred background texture all the way up to the edge of your work. And that's just if you're including borders. You know, not everybody does that. And instead of a border, that could be the edge of, you know, your center design, or just a change of pattern, or, you know, it's I can't reinforce enough that this is art. There are a million different ways to get very similar end results. Pick the way that makes you happy and that you feel confident and comfortable with, because, you know, there's not really a right or wrong way to do it. If it holds together, it's gonna last, and if you like the way that it looks, then you did it right. So that's I can't even say that, oh, well, that's about it, because this is just the tip of the iceberg, you guys. I have seen folks go through and use tools like this as the background for different pieces. So again, this same kind of almost like scattered sunflower seed or watermelon seed effect can be done with almost any tool. It's a great effect. And I've seen whole handbags that were just this tool over and over again, and that was the pattern. And because once you go through with an antique gel, or if you stain it and then block it with like a highlight color or something, all of that detail just shines, and it really can bring your leather work up to the next level. So if y'all have any questions, comments, or ideas, I would really love to hear from you. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy my tutorials. And if you enjoy my free tutorials and would like to do more to support my channel, please consider joining me over on Patreon. We do all sorts of different stuff over there. So links for all that and everything will be down below. There'll also be links to my social media if you would like to share your work with me. You could tag me, that way I can see it, and I'm trying to kind of get my act together so that, you know, get my head on straight so I can feature some of y'all's amazing work on my Facebook page and on my Instagram and stuff. So if you tag me, be sure to include the website and stuff that you would like, if you have an Etsy store or a Facebook page or your own domain or something that you would like for me to link back to, because I'd really like to be able to point people in the right direction for if you have your stuff for sale. So try to give back to y'all as much as y'all have given to me. So, but on that note though, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see y'all in my next video. So bye, happy crafting.